The real reason why humans are banned from galactic warfare. The Galactic Council has long maintained a strict and unwavering policy. Humans are strictly forbidden from participating in any form of galactic warfare. Official records cite various reasons. Humans are considered primitive, underdeveloped, lacking in advanced technology, and politically unstable. On paper, this justification seems reasonable. After all, humanity is barely crawling out of its home solar system, still struggling with internal conflicts and environmental issues. They lag behind in terms of fleet size, energy manipulation, and artificial intelligence. To most species, humans are harmless, simple creatures who have only recently learned how to leave their own atmosphere. To the younger generations of aliens, the official story makes perfect sense. Why would the Galactic Council, a collection of the most advanced civilizations in the known universe, ever see humans as a threat? But the truth is much darker and far more terrifying. Those who have read between the lines, or worse, survived humanity's brief involvement in the Great Zorian War of 3576 know exactly why humans are banned. It's not because humans are weak. It's not because they're primitive. It's because, when it comes to warfare, humans are different. The kind of different that makes even the most hardened warrior species tremble. It began when the Zorblons, a species known for their cunning and strategic manipulation, saw an opportunity. They believed humans could serve as expendable soldiers, disposable cannon fodder to be thrown into the meat grinder of the Great War. To the Zorblons, the logic was simple. Why waste valuable Zorblon warriors when you could recruit a few thousand humans to soak up plasma blasts and clear minefields? They thought they were being clever. They thought they could control humanity. They were wrong. At first, it all seemed to go according to plan. The humans accepted the offer with surprising enthusiasm, eager to participate in what they called off-world operations. The Zorblons equipped them with outdated weapons and minimal training, confident that the humans would at best serve as distractions. Then came the first battles, and with them, the first terrifying realization. Unlike most species who viewed warfare as a tragic necessity, a last resort to be handled with honor and precision, humans approached war as a science, or worse, as an art form. While other species fought within the unspoken limits of galactic warfare, respecting ancient codes and agreements, humans simply didn't care. They didn't even know those limits existed. The most chilling discovery, however, was humanity's concept of war crimes. For most galactic civilizations, war crimes were incomprehensible. Why would anyone make a list of things that are too evil or too cruel to be used in war? Either you fought or you surrendered. Simple, but humans. They made a list, and then did everything that wasn't on the list. Worse yet, humans actively searched for loopholes. They redefined what was possible on the battlefield. Plasma rifles. Cute. Humans reverse-engineered them into portable fusion lances capable of vaporizing armored battalions. Energy shields. Humans found ways to invert them, turning defensive barriers into high-frequency pulse emitters. Standard-issue explosives. They weaponized black holes. Actual, small-scale, artificial black holes. When confronted, human engineers reportedly shrugged and said, "Well, you didn't say we couldn't." The psychological impact was devastating. Species that had waged war for millennia suddenly found themselves facing an enemy that refused to play by the rules, because to humans, there were no rules, only objectives. Worse still, humans treated impossible challenges as personal dares. If a task was labeled as impossible, humans viewed it as a creative opportunity. By the time the Zorblons realized what they had unleashed, it was too late. The humans had scienced their way into superiority. The humans didn't just fight, they outfought the entire war. Even with inferior numbers and older technology, humans leveraged their most dangerous weapon of all, imagination. They improvised on the fly, broke every convention, and gleefully manipulated physics as if it were just another variable in their equations. They ignored standard galactic military doctrines entirely, inventing new tactics and weaponry faster than anyone could react. This is how the infamous Yeet Cannon was born. a modified faster-than-light drive weapon capable of launching projectiles at relativistic speeds, creating destruction that could only be described as obscene. Galactic scholars still debate how it even worked. The only thing they agreed on, it shouldn't have. When the war finally ended, the galactic powers didn't celebrate. They stared into the void left behind by human ingenuity and collectively realized, these creatures are too dangerous. The Zorblons surrendered not out of strategic necessity, but out of sheer terror. After the war, the Galactic Council convened in an emergency session. The question wasn't whether humans should be punished. It was simpler than that. How do we keep them away from the rest of the galaxy? And so, humans were banned from galactic warfare. Not as a punishment, as a desperate act of survival. The official story was crafted to be digestible and politically safe. Humans are primitive. Humans are unstable. These excuses were easier to swallow than the truth that every species present at that council meeting had quietly agreed that they would rather face extinction than ever fight beside, against, or anywhere near humanity again. To this day, most of the younger generation of galactic citizens still believe the propaganda. They whisper about humans being fragile, erratic, and unreliable. But the elders, the veterans, the ones who saw firsthand what a human mind can do under pressure, they don't whisper. They don't talk at all. They just shiver and hope. Hope that humanity never gets bored of their little blue planet, and hope even harder that humanity never decides to get creative again. Because if they do, no shield, no fleet, no treaty will be enough. The terrifying truth is simple. Humanity isn't banned because they're weak. Humanity is banned because they're unstoppable, humanity's dangerous way of thinking. The thing that sets humans apart from every other known species isn't just their biology or their primitive homeworld. It isn't their surprisingly high pain tolerance or their stubborn refusal to die even when common sense dictates they should. It's their thinking. The way humans process problems is not just different, it's profoundly unsettling to the rest of the galaxy. When the Zorblons first drafted humans into the Great Zorian War, they assumed they were dealing with another predictable species. Galactic warfare had long settled into a kind of grim rhythm across the stars. Every major civilization understood the unwritten rules: deploy ships, exchange fire, manage attrition, and when one side's losses became unsustainable, negotiate a truce. It was brutal, yes, but it was predictable. Everyone knew the dance. Everyone knew the limits. Humans? They didn't even hear the music. Professor Zix9 had spent decades teaching alien students about military history, cultural anthropology, and comparative warfare tactics. Every species, no matter how aggressive or peaceful, approached war within the framework of survival, honor, or necessity. You fight when you must, you surrender when you can't win, and you never, ever violate the basic rules that kept wars from becoming existential threats to the fabric of reality itself. Then came the humans. Fine. For them, war wasn't just about survival or territory. It was about winning no matter the cost. More than that, humans enjoyed the puzzle. They approached battlefields like grand experiments. Where other species saw limitations, humans saw variables to tweak, systems to exploit, and rules to bend until they snapped. The terrifying part wasn't just that they could think outside the box. It was that humans didn't seem to recognize there even was a box. They called it problem solving, as if tearing holes in the fundamental laws of physics was just another engineering challenge. When humans first joined the war effort under Zorblon command, they were handed standard plasma rifles and low-tier support vehicles. The Zorblons believed humans would spend most of the campaign taking orders and absorbing enemy fire. But within weeks, human engineers had reworked their equipment entirely, merging scrap metal, black market tech, and what could only be described as sheer madness to create weapons that were so unorthodox, they seemed impossible. One human officer famously remarked during an intercepted transmission, "Neat toy. We can do better." And they did. They turned defensive shields into gravitational slingshots. They turned outdated starfighter engines into kinetic orbital bombardment platforms. They weaponized hyperdense matter to create the galaxy's first, and hopefully last, tactical black hole generator. When the Galactic Council finally saw the aftermath of the humans' field upgrades, the reports were so horrifying that entire sections were classified under penalty of death. But it wasn't just the weapons. It was the attitude. While other species meticulously calculated casualties, probability matrices, and supply lines, humans measured wars in stories, legends, the tale that would be told after the dust settled. They weren't concerned with minimizing losses or even maximizing efficiency. They wanted to win, sure, but they wanted to win memorably. They weren't fighting for resources or territory. They were fighting for narrative, for the sheer, chaotic, deeply human satisfaction of doing something no one else would dare attempt. And it worked. Humans consistently turned battles that should have been their own funerals into absurd, chaotic victories. They fought not like soldiers, but like gamblers pushing odds, bluffing entire fleets, and risking everything on insane maneuvers that had no business succeeding but somehow did. It wasn't uncommon for Zix-9 to read reports where human forces, outnumbered 50-1, not only held their ground, but managed to reverse the situation entirely. Entire enemy armadas would retreat, not because they were defeated, but because they had no idea what the humans would do next. After witnessing them launch a derelict freighter into a star to create an artificial solar flare mid-battle, even the most disciplined admirals became hesitant to engage. The term impossible meant nothing to them. To a human, impossible was simply another word for challenge accepted. This was not mere stubbornness. It was their default state. Kiki, Zix-9's assistant, had once asked innocently, "Isn't that kind of bravery noble?" Zix-9 nearly choked on his nutrient slurry. Noble? No, not noble. Not in the traditional sense. Humans didn't follow the noble path out of principle. They followed it because it worked. They weren't bound by honor codes or long-standing military traditions. They were free, terrifyingly free. While other species respected the natural laws of the universe, humans treated those laws like speed bumps. Perhaps the most damning example was the Yeet cannon incident. Using a modified faster-than-light drive and a few tons of starship debris, humans created a weapon that could hurl matter at relativistic speeds, bypassing energy shields and triggering localized reality distortions. Not only did it worked so well that the Galactic Council temporarily banned FTL research altogether out of sheer panic. When asked to explain why they built such a weapon, the humans reportedly shrugged and said, "Why not?" But the worst part, at least in Zix-9's view, was that humans didn't revel in destruction for its own sake. They weren't sadists. They weren't conquerors. Most of them weren't even soldiers by trade. They were explorers, engineers, scientists, artists, and somehow, all of those things combined into the galaxy's most unpredictable warmongers. To them, war was just another kind of challenge. A puzzle to be solved. A problem to be hacked, optimized, and above all else, survived. And they were too good at surviving. Even the robotic species, cold and calculated as they were, couldn't grasp human tactics. Machines operated on logic and probability. Humans played with emotion, intuition, and sheer audacity. A human general would bluff an entire fleet with nothing but static-filled radio chatter, or sacrifice their flagship not to win directly, but to make the enemy hesitate for just long enough for reinforcements to arrive. And somehow, it worked. The ultimate reason humans terrified the galaxy wasn't their weapons. It wasn't even their scientific breakthroughs. It was their minds, their creativity, their capacity for chaos. They approached warfare like it was a playground, constantly asking, "What if?" and never stopping to consider, "Should we?" The other species saw war as a tragic necessity. Humans saw it as a sandbox. And that, Zix-9 knew, was the most dangerous thing of all. Because while ships could be disarmed and weapons destroyed, you could never disarm an idea. And for humans, war wasn't about plasma rifles or battleships. It was about making the impossible possible and turning certainty into uncertainty. The galaxy could handle big weapons. It could handle big armies, but it could never handle humans. Not really. The galaxy assumed that humans, like every other species, sought conquest, control, or survival. That they must surely desire dominion over others, or at least revenge for past slights. But humans didn't think like that. Their motivations were more complicated, sometimes terrifyingly so. Humans were explorers. They thrived on challenges, puzzles, and creativity. Galactic warfare, to them, had simply been a sandbox they stumbled into and tinkered with for a while. But once the novelty wore off, they shrugged and went back home, much like a human child losing interest in an old toy. That was why they didn't push further. It wasn't because of fear. It wasn't because of containment. It was because they didn't care enough. And that's what scared the Council more than anything. Because what happens when they do care again? What happens when they get bored enough to look outward once more? When the puzzles of their own world grow stale? When they finish binge-watching Netflix, or, stars forbid, decide that the next great challenge lies beyond their pale blue dot? Professor Zix9 could only shudder at the possibilities. There were already troubling signs. Intercepted human transmissions showed discussions of colonizing Mars and Europa, bodies marked as protected by the Galactic Council for their scientific and ecological significance. Yet humans didn't even bother asking for permission. In their minds, why should they? Those bodies existed in their solar system. Therefore, they were fair game. Worse still, humans referred to the protected status as cute, but optional. Optional. Humans were never contained. They simply chose to stay away. For centuries, the official galactic narrative had been clear. Humanity was safely contained on its little blue planet. The Galactic Council assured itself and the wider galaxy that humans had learned their lesson after the Great Zorian War. They were isolated, forbidden from participating in military affairs, and lacked the means to seriously threaten galactic stability ever again. Most species accepted this story without question, finding comfort in the idea that the monsters behind the chaos were locked away. But anyone who had ever truly dealt with humanity knew the truth. Humans were not contained. They simply left. Zix9 had reviewed the classified files himself, files that most species weren't even aware existed. The humans didn't stay on Earth because they were imprisoned there. There were no galactic force fields surrounding their solar system. No quarantine fleets monitoring their borders, no standing army stationed to deter them. In fact, no active containment measures existed at all. Humans stayed because they wanted to. After the war, humans simply packed up, returned home, and closed the door behind them. They didn't ask for negotiations. They didn't demand spoils or territory. They didn't even retaliate for the countless betrayals and mistreatment they'd endured during their brief conscription under the Zorblans. They just stopped. Officially, they cited reasons that sounded comically mundane to the Galactic Council. They claimed they needed to recover, to focus on internal affairs, or to catch up on entertainment. Entire species scoffed at the notion that an entire civilization would walk away from the stars because of something called Netflix. But those who had stared into human eyes during the war knew it wasn't about entertainment, it was about choice. Humans didn't retreat because they were afraid. They retreated because for them the galaxy wasn't interesting enough anymore. It was Zix9's personal opinion, though he rarely shared it, that humanity had simply grown bored. They had solved the problem. They had cracked the puzzle. They had taken the galaxy's best, brightest, and most brutal, flipped them upside down, and walked away like a child who had finished a toy and left it on the shelf. And what terrified Zix9 more than anything else was the realization that humans hadn't even tried their hardest. Throughout the war, they had shown only a fraction of their potential. Yes, the Yeet cannon had terrified entire sectors. Yes, they'd weaponized black holes and destabilized stars with casual efficiency. But if one read the human communications, intercepted chatter after action reports, even personal logs, It became clear they had been holding back. The human soldiers weren't deploying their most dangerous ideas. They were experimenting. Refining, learning. Even as they shattered conventional galactic strategy, they were testing the waters, poking the boundaries, and quietly taking notes for next time. And then, just when the rest of the galaxy was sure that humanity would push forward to seize power, they went home. They left behind only rumors and nightmares. Blowback. One of Zix-9's more excitable students once asked during a lecture, "But if they're not contained, why don't they come back? Why aren't they conquering us right now?" Zix-9 had no answer, not one he was willing to give out loud. But deep down, he suspected the answer was disarmingly simple. They didn't want to. That word haunted Zix-9. Because that's how humans viewed most of the galaxy's precious laws and traditions, as optional. They didn't outright rebel. They didn't declare open hostility. They simply ignored the rules when it suited them. Or worse, they followed the letter of the law while completely violating its spirit. And no one could stop them. Not really. When the Council learned of humanity's plans for interplanetary colonization, they issued the usual threats: cease and desist, violations of galactic code, sanctions, embargoes, official condemnations. Humans replied with an emoji, a smiling face, and then they kept going. That's when Zix-9 realized that humanity wasn't just unconcerned with the galaxy's threats, they found them amusing. Rodriguez, the infamous human captain who had once led the terrifying Earth Battalion during the war, said it best during an unsanctioned communication intercepted by Council intelligence. "You all act like we're trapped here. We're not. We're tilling. They weren't stuck. They weren't hiding. They were relaxing. And that thought was more terrifying than any armada. Because when a species can turn black holes into weapons and stars into fireworks, and then willingly stop, not because they lost, but because they felt like it, it means they hold all the cards. They simply aren't playing right now. The galaxy wasn't safe because humans were weak. The galaxy was safe because humans had better things to do. For now, humans return not as conquerors, but to play. The Galactic Council had not heard from humanity in nearly a century, at least not directly. There were always rumors, of course, intercepted transmissions about Mars colonies, whispers of Europa expeditions, even talk of artificial suns being constructed in the Sol system. But no formal contact, no delegation, no declaration of intent. For most Council members, that was enough to sleep at night. The humans were staying put. The galaxy could breathe easy. Until one cycle, they simply returned. No grand fleet, no war banners, no planet-sized superweapon. Just a single delegation of human representatives walking through the Council's grand doors like they had been invited to a casual lunch. Leading them was none other than Captain Rodriguez, still grinning like he had just pulled off a prank. Professor Zix-9 had been there when it happened. He could still feel the chill that settled over the chamber when the humans stepped in. Conversations died mid-sentence. Tentacles, antennae, and eye stalks froze. Even the gaseous species dimmed in luminosity. Every diplomat in the room knew exactly who they were looking at. For a terrifying second, the room held its breath. Was this it? Was this the return? The feared invasion? The long-anticipated day when humanity finally got bored of isolation and decided to make the galaxy interesting again by force? But what Rodriguez said next didn't make sense. Not to anyone. "We want to join the Space Olympics." The words echoed through the vast chamber like a plasma charge misfiring. Some species blinked in confusion, others literally, some biologically, and some with mechanical blinking protocols. A few thought it was a translation error. Surely he meant war games, or perhaps Olympics was some kind of human slang for planetary bombardment. But no. Rodriguez meant exactly what he said. The humans wanted to host and participate in a multi-species sporting event. A Galactic Olympics. That was it. No threats, no demands, No ultimatum. Just games. Gins games. Zix-9 felt his eye stalks twitch uncontrollably. He had reviewed human history. He knew the Terrans loved competition. From ancient foot races to orbital dogfights, humans could turn anything into a contest. But this was absurd. The most dangerous species the galaxy had ever encountered was asking politely to play games. Rodriguez even brought a holographic proposal. Humans had drafted entire event categories, ranging from traditional races and strength contests to stranger activities. Zix-9 still remembered the first one displayed, cosmic surfing. The concept, surf the event horizon of a black hole without being spaghettified. Kiki, Zix-9's feathered assistant, had let out an audible gasp. The room predictably erupted into chaos. Preposterous. Illegal, reckless, dangerous. Delegates shouted, flailed, and panicked. More than one species threatened to walk out of the council entirely. The idea of letting humans back into the galactic spotlight was unthinkable, let alone handing them the keys to organize events where the rules of physics were merely suggestions. Through it all, Rodriguez stood calmly, arms crossed, smirk never leaving his face. When the council finally regained some semblance of order, Zix-9 found himself pulled aside by the very human captain he had hoped never to see again. "Captain," Zix-9 whispered, "I must insist you reconsider. You know what you're doing. You know how fragile this council is." Rodriguez laughed, clapping Zix-9 on the back in that unnervingly friendly way humans had. "Relax, Prof. We're just here to have fun. Show off a little. Make some new friends." Fun? To humans, the potential unraveling of centuries of interstellar diplomacy was fun. It got worse. The humans had brought not just a proposal, but participants. Athletes, engineers, event coordinators, an entire team of specialists dedicated to making this insane idea a reality. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to play. And worse still, they were excited about it. Even the council's threats didn't seem to faze them. When the council reminded Rodriguez of the ancient ban, the captain just shrugged. "Oh, you mean the one about us participating in war? Relax. This is just sports." Zix-9 couldn't believe what he was hearing. Humans had been forbidden from war, yes, but technically, the ban didn't say anything about competitions. The wording had always focused on military engagement, not recreational events. And the humans knew it. Zix-9 realized with horror that the humans had probably known it from the very beginning. When asked why they would risk rekindling old fears, Rodriguez simply said, "Because why not? Besides, no one's shooting. We're just here to have a good time." And somehow, despite their better judgment, some of the species present started to agree. Not because they trusted humans. No sane species did. But because the humans' infectious enthusiasm was, to put it bluntly, hard to resist. Rodriguez projected more events onto the council's holotable. Neutron Star Javelin Throw, Zero-G Wrestling, Comet Polo, and the Piste de Resistance, Quasar Golf, where the goal was to bend gravitational waves to guide charged particles into the heart of a pulsar. By the time Rodriguez finished the presentation, parts of the chamber were starting to buzz with interest. Kiki noticed it first. "Professor," she whispered, "I think some of them like the idea." Zix-9 could hardly blame them. The galaxy had been stagnant for ages. Politics, treaties, and bureaucracy dominated every interaction. But humans offered something different. Something dangerous, yes, but also thrilling. Excitement. For species who had seen the same unchanging patterns of galactic diplomacy for millennia, the humans' wild, chaotic proposal was like a spark thrown into dry tinder. The first to officially accept was Ambassador Corlex of the Spilopodian Collective, a massive multi-tentacled being infamous for its stoic demeanor. It slithered forward, eyes gleaming. "We accept your challenge, humans. But if we win, you will reduce your enthusiasm for galactic remodeling." Rodriguez only grinned wider. "Deal. And if we win, you host the next one." Laughter, nervous at first, then genuine, rippled through the chamber. Zix-9 slumped into his chair, watching helplessly as the galaxy's oldest and most cautious species willingly began to draft rules for events humans themselves had suggested. They were playing right into humanity's hands. Rodriguez wasn't here to threaten the galaxy. He was here to play. And yet, Zix-9 knew deep down that was exactly why it was so dangerous. Humans didn't need armies to disrupt galactic order. They didn't need wars. All they needed was a game. And suddenly, the galaxy was hanging on their every word. Because humans, Zix-9 realized with sinking horror, could make even the most terrifying situation seem fun. And worse, the galaxy desperately wanted to have fun with them. The barbecue that changed the galaxy. The strange thing was, it didn't start as a plan. Not really. It wasn't a clever infiltration. It wasn't a maneuver designed to shift power. It was just typical human nonsense. And yet, somehow, it worked better than any weapon humanity had ever unleashed. Zix-9 could pinpoint the exact moment it began, midway through the chaotic preparations for the first official intergalactic games. The Council had reluctantly approved the sporting event, hoping to placate the humans without handing them too much influence. It was supposed to be harmless, a symbolic gesture. The rules had been carefully constructed, the events heavily regulated, and contingency plans drafted in case the humans tried anything clever. But they forgot one thing. They forgot about the barbecue. The suggestion came so casually that no one even recognized the impact at first. "Oh, and obviously," Captain Rodriguez had said, spinning lazily in his chair during one of the logistics meetings, "we'll need to wrap up the games with a proper barbecue. You know, big celebration, food, drinks, the usual." At the time, most species present didn't even understand the term. The translators struggled to find a precise equivalent. Some registered it as communal food preparation ritual. Others flagged it as informal victory feast. The Council let it pass. What harm could food do? Within weeks, they realized the answer. It wasn't just a feast. It wasn't just a human tradition. It was a gravitational force, pulling species together like no diplomat, no treaty, no desperate ceasefire ever could. Zix-9 stood helplessly as the barbecue spiraled out of control. Species who had never shared more than a tense handshake began swapping spice blends and marinade formulas like ancient allies. The council chambers, usually tense and sterile, echoed with arguments about cooking temperatures and the molecular structure of smoky flavor. By the time anyone realized what was happening, there were full committees forming. Not for weapons limitations or border disputes, but for grill design, beverage pairings, and side dish categorization. The Tarathians, famous for their militaristic stoicism, volunteered to handle event security, not to prevent violence, but to ensure no one cheated during the sauce-off. The arachnoid diplomats, previously feared for their unrelenting aggression, submitted a formal request to host the dessert competition, boasting of their 8-limbed pastry techniques. The Void Dwellers, literal beings of dark matter, offered to contribute dark chocolate, though they refused to elaborate on the ingredient sourcing. Zix-9 watched it all unfold like a bad simulation glitch. Only it wasn't bad, it was working. Long-standing rivalries dissolved. Former enemies who had once exchanged plasma fire across disputed star systems now traded recipes for neutron star-grilled ribs. Arguments no longer centered around treaties and reparations, but over whether cryogenic smoking enhanced or ruined the flavor of silicon-based dishes. Even the terrifying Chronowaras, masters of time manipulation, volunteered to cater the event with dishes served in perfect temporal alignment, ensuring every species experienced their food at peak flavor, even if it hadn't technically finished cooking yet. And the humans? They just grinned. "Told you," Rodriguez had whispered to Zix-9 as the council floor erupted into enthusiastic chatter about the optimal preparation of galactic chili. Food brings people together. Zix-9 wanted to argue, to remind the human captain that galactic order wasn't meant to be built on competitive grilling, that this wasn't the way things were supposed to work. But as he scanned the room, filled with laughter, open discussion, and the unmistakable aroma of experimental sauces, He found the words dying in his throat. The games themselves became secondary. Oh, they still happened, of course. Humans wouldn't pass up the opportunity to show off in front of an audience. But even the most dangerous events, black hole surfing, neutron star javelin throw, gravity slingshot races, were overshadowed by the growing excitement around the culinary showdown. When the day of the barbecue finally arrived, it was beyond anything Zix-9 could have imagined. What was meant to be a simple closing ceremony had transformed into the largest gathering in recorded galactic history. Delegations arrived from systems previously thought to be in voluntary isolation. Fleets that had once prowled borders showed up towing massive portable cooking stations. Even the notoriously absent Eldarians, ancient enigmatic beings who rarely participated in council affairs, sent a delegation claiming to possess the perfect marinade. It wasn't just food. It was connection. Species who had spent millennia viewing each other with suspicion stood shoulder to shoulder around open flame and plasma grills. The air buzzed with aromas never before combined. Sulfuric spice blends, molecular caramelization, and hints of neutron-activated smoke. Conversations that would have once required translators and mediators now flowed freely, lubricated by human-invented beverages whose alcohol content should have been banned under several planetary health codes. Zix-9, reluctantly pulled into the festivities by Kiki, found himself seated between a gas-based lifeform debating the merits of human-style slow roasting and a trio of crystalline ambassadors explaining the geological properties of their mineral-based seasoning techniques. Somewhere across the plaza, the Spilopodian ambassador, infamous for its political ruthlessness, was engaging in an enthusiastic and shockingly competent karaoke performance with Rodriguez. It was chaos. And it was working. Even species who couldn't physically consume food participated. The energy-based Vortai constructed light displays synchronized to the rhythms of the feast, while the chronowares offered to record the entire event across multiple temporal frames so that attendees could relive it from different perspectives. Most astonishing of all, disputes dissolved, not through treaties or compromises, but through shared experiences. Zix-9 watched as two bitter rivals from the Orion sector ended a generations-long trade dispute after discovering a mutual love of Earth-style cornbread. At one point, Zix-9 pulled Rodriguez aside. "Captain, you've destabilized the council." Rodriguez just shrugged, flipping something that looked suspiciously like a spiced meat slab onto a hot plate. "Destabilized? No, Professor. We just reminded them how to have fun." "This isn't sustainable," Zix-9 insisted. "Galactic unity based on food and games. It's madness." Rodriguez chuckled. "Maybe, but it's a madness they chose." And that was the most terrifying part. No coercion, no manipulation, no threats. The galaxy had chosen this. They weren't being tricked into peace. They were embracing it. Zix-9 tried to step back emotionally, to look at it like a scientist, like a council professor of political theory should. But every time he analyzed the situation, he reached the same impossible conclusion. This was working better than any peace accord in recorded history. It was the human way, not conquest, not dominance, but simple, unrelenting enthusiasm. And somehow, against all logic, it was bringing the galaxy together. By the time the sun set on the closing day of the games and barbecue, a quiet consensus had formed, one that would never have passed in a formal vote but emerged nonetheless. The humans were no longer outsiders. They were family. They hadn't forced the galaxy into submission. They hadn't needed to. They just offered everyone a plate of food, a shared song, and a chance to breathe. And the galaxy, tired and fractured as it was, accepted. Zix-9 stood on the observation deck, watching as species departed not with suspicion, but with invitations. Trade routes were reopened. Alliances were forged not out of necessity, but genuine friendship. Species swapped sauces instead of insults. Kiki fluttered beside him, holding what appeared to be a leftover slice of human cheesecake. "Professor?" she asked softly. "Do you think this will last?" Zix-9 didn't answer immediately. He watched the stars shimmer in the distance, ships of every shape and size leaving together, traveling side by side. He thought of the chaos, the unpredictability, the sheer absurdity of it all, and he smiled. "Maybe," he said at last. "Maybe it will. Because if anyone could reshape the galaxy, it wasn't the most powerful, the most advanced, or the most ancient. It was the species crazy enough to turn the greatest political assembly in history into a barbecue. And somehow, make it work. The accidental heart of the galaxy. No one could remember exactly when it happened. There was no formal resolution, no signed charter, no great announcement that declared humanity the cultural center of the galactic community. It just happened. Zix-9 watched it unfold in slow motion, helpless against the tide. At first, it was subtle. After the intergalactic games and the now legendary barbecue, species slowly returned to their home systems, but they didn't return the same. They left with recipes, hand-drawn star maps marked with potential racing circuits, and more importantly, a kind of strange excitement. The galaxy had grown used to tedium, the dull repetition of diplomacy, the fragile balance of power maintained by bureaucracy and veiled threats. Humans had shattered that monotony without meaning to, or maybe they meant to. Zix-9 still wasn't sure. The professor had spent cycles studying the ripples. He attended council meetings where ambassadors who previously required layers of translators now traded jokes in an emerging mishmash of human slang and local dialects. Entire negotiations were now peppered with phrases like "no worries," "grill it out," and "space for dessert," terms that hadn't even existed before the humans arrived. More disturbingly, the formal structure of the council itself had begun to shift. What was once a stone-faced body of carefully posturing representatives now looked suspiciously like a human town hall. Delegates no longer obsessed over seating hierarchies. Meetings opened with shared meals, often prepared using blended recipes from multiple species. Decisions were still made, important ones, but they were made over coffee, cakes, and debate that more often resembled human family arguments than formal diplomacy. And the galaxy was happier. No one wanted to admit it outright. Not yet. Not after cycles of paranoia and militarization. But there it was. Undeniable in the day-to-day. Old enemies now partnered on research projects. Trade flowed more freely. Border disputes, which once routinely escalated to armed skirmishes, were now resolved through competitive baking. Zix-9 wasn't joking. The Seldari-Turathian territorial disagreement over the Asterix drift was officially settled via the galaxy's first zero-gravity Suffle contest. Both sides agreed that whoever's dessert held its form best without collapsing under gravitational fluctuations would retain partial mining rights. They sealed the arrangement by splitting the winning Suffle down the middle and sharing it. And somehow, that worked. It wasn't that the humans had forced anyone to do it. They hadn't. They hadn't made demands. They hadn't threatened war. They hadn't even pushed for leadership positions. They just kept showing up, smiling, offering food, suggesting new games, telling increasingly ridiculous stories about their homeworld, and the galaxy had followed. They had made it fun. Professor Zix-9 tried to rationalize it to himself. Maybe it was just novelty. Maybe the galaxy would tire of the chaos and return to the cold comfort of procedure and rules. But the data said otherwise. In the cycles following the first games, reports of interstellar incidents dropped to record lows. Trade and cultural exchange skyrocketed. Most species even reported improved internal relations as old sectarian divides softened under the influence of shared traditions borrowed from humanity's chaotic social playbook. And the humans weren't done. Rodriguez, somehow still leading this accidental revolution without ever accepting a formal title, expanded the games almost immediately. The second iteration was 10 times larger. This time, dozens of new events were added, from gravity curling to comet herding, and, of course, the now infamous Universal Barbecue Championship, which saw nearly every known species submit an entry. Zix-9 watched in stunned silence as alliances once formed in desperation were replaced by friendship leagues, organizing their own sub-tournaments, cook-offs, and art exhibitions. Humanity hadn't dismantled the Galactic Council. They had made it irrelevant. Why posture over resource rights when you could settle it by seeing who could terraform an asteroid into the most comfortable sports arena? Even Kiki, his diligent assistant, had been swept up in it. She had abandoned her academic posting temporarily to serve as an organizer for the Council's Interstellar Bake-Off Committee. Her reports were filled less with scientific data and more with tips on baking temperatures and variable gravitational fields and suggestions for improved interspecies taste translation devices. Zix-9 wasn't blind. He saw the laughter, the excitement. Even the crustiest old diplomats, species whose records were older than some stars, had begun to soften under the onslaught of human-style hospitality. Delegations who once refused to share oxygen were now collaborating on publishing a multi-species cookbook. But what truly unsettled Zix-9 was that it didn't stop at politics. Culture itself was shifting. Music, fashion, even language began to evolve under human influence. Songs that mixed Terran rhythms with alien tonal structures filled public plazas. Species famous for their formal garments began adopting human-style casual wear, often to hilarious effect when bioforms without bones attempted denim. One delegate from the crystalline Dravax Empire proudly gifted Zix-9 a handmade Galactic BQ crew apron, its sparkly pink letters clashing dramatically with the professor's otherwise formal academic robes. The gift was earnest, and somehow Zix-9 could not bring himself to decline it. Even the chronically humorless Siberians, a machine race who once calculated every interaction to 16 decimal points of efficiency, were now producing increasingly popular holovids featuring comedic reenactments of failed sporting attempts during the first games. It was chaos. Absolute, inescapable, joyous chaos. And yet, Zix-9 couldn't help but feel an undercurrent of dread. Because if humanity could do this accidentally, what could they do on purpose? Rodriguez remained as infuriatingly casual as ever, wandering between events as if he weren't watching entire civilizations reshaping themselves around human traditions. During one particularly crowded council session, Zix-9 cornered him behind a food stall serving something called space chili. "Captain, you do understand what you've done, yes?" Rodriguez grinned, stuffing a spoonful of chili into his mouth. "We threw a party." "You didn't just throw a party," Zix-9 hissed. "You rewrote galactic society. Look around you. There are border agreements based on pie baking contests, fleet deployments scheduled around volleyball tournaments. Our judicial system has a buckyball clause, Rodriguez." Rodriguez just laughed. Better than war, right? And Zix-9 had no retort. Because, objectively, it was better. It was better than centuries of Cold War, saber-rattling, and slow-building disasters. The galaxy wasn't just surviving under this human-inspired chaos, it was thriving. In a quiet moment later that evening, as Zix-9 stood overlooking the Dames Arena, a patchwork of bizarre, mismatched structures somehow functioning in harmony, he admitted it to himself. This was working. Humanity hadn't bullied its way into galactic dominance. They hadn't manipulated anyone into submission. They hadn't conquered with weapons. They conquered with cookouts, with ridiculous sports, with spontaneous friendships, with that strange, unstoppable human tendency to make everything personal, to make everything about connection. And the most terrifying part? No one wanted it to stop. Not even Zix-9. He found himself absent-mindedly humming along to a hybrid human Seldari folk song echoing from the far side of the plaza. Kiki, perched beside him, scribbling notes for next cycle's bake-off, nudged him gently. "You okay, Professor?" Zix-9 sighed. "I don't think things will ever be the same." Kiki's feathers fluffed happily. "Good." And somehow, against every instinct in his academic, cautious, protocol-bound soul, Zix-9 smiled. Because maybe, just maybe, This wasn't a disaster. Maybe this was the galaxy finally learning to live. Humanity's chaos becomes the galaxy's culture. The galaxy changed. Not overnight, not through conquest, not by force, but slowly, insidiously, and, to Zix-9's horror, willingly. The humans didn't rewrite galactic society by storming the council chambers or demanding power. They simply showed up with open arms, strange ideas, bizarre customs, and an alarming ability to make everyone have fun. And the galaxy couldn't get enough. In the cycles following the first intergalactic games and the Great Barbecue, as it was already being called in the unofficial galactic channels, something shifted. Zix-9 watched helplessly as the old, carefully balanced, precarious order of the galaxy crumbled, only to be replaced by something else entirely. Something vibrant. Something chaotic. Something undeniably human. It wasn't formal. No one passed a decree stating that human traditions were to be integrated into galactic society. But when species who had spent millennia embroiled in endless disputes suddenly started collaborating, not on weapons development, but on designing better grills, organizing anti-gravity volleyball leagues, or exchanging spiced beverage recipes, it was obvious to anyone paying attention. Humans had become the cultural heart of the galaxy. And the strangest part? No one even resisted. Zix-9 could hardly believe what he was witnessing. Even the most uptight militaristic species weren't just tolerating the change. They were leading it. The Terathians, once feared for their unflinching adherence to military hierarchy, were now the self-declared referees of the galaxy's first interstellar tug-of-war league. The stoic Spilopodians, famous for their cold, calculating political strategies, were embroiled in a bitter but somehow friendly rivalry over which of their colonies could produce the best slow-smoked meats. The arachnoids, who had terrified diplomats for centuries, now operated the most popular culinary school in the quadrant, specializing in gravity-baked pastries. The Siberians, a logic-based machine civilization, published a widely distributed treatise titled Statistical Advantages of Cross-Species Recreational Activities in Reducing Interstellar Hostilities. Their conclusion? Further human-style interaction strongly recommended. It would have been hilarious if it weren't so terrifying. Zix-9 had spent his entire career studying the delicate ecosystem of galactic politics. Wars, diplomacy, rivalries, they all maintained a certain order. Not a pleasant order, but an understood one. But this was something new, something uncontrolled. Humans hadn't introduced chaos by accident. Chaos was the introduction. And yet, it worked. Zix-9 sat through council meetings where the old procedures had been thrown out the airlock. Agenda points were now discussed, and often resolved, over potlucks. Disputes weren't escalated to weapons mobilization, but rather settled by what had horrifyingly become known as challenge protocols, a human-inspired method where conflicts were resolved through games, cooking contests, or art competitions. Even Zix-9 had been roped into judging one of these challenges, a baking contest between two minor factions disputing mining rights over a small moon. He had begrudgingly declared the Spilopodians' caramelized crystal tarts the winner, only to later receive thank-you gifts from both sides, each delighted by the outcome regardless. The implications kept him awake at night. Because this wasn't a temporary phenomenon. It was becoming permanent. The problem, if it could even be called that, wasn't just that humans had infected the galaxy with their chaotic creativity. It was that every species had embraced it. With both appendages, claws, tentacles, pseudopods, or in the case of the gaseous Beta Centauri swarm, their collective consciousness. It wasn't just food and sports anymore. Galactic art exhibitions were now filled with human-inspired pieces. Murals depicting joyous gatherings, improvised games, and surreal images of humans surfing black holes were popping up across public spaces. Songs composed in hybrid human-alien scales topped entertainment networks. Children from dozens of species now played Earth-originated games like hide and seek, capture the flag, or the terrifyingly popular zero-G dodgeball. Perhaps most tellingly, humans weren't directing any of this. They didn't claim leadership. They didn't ask for power. They didn't rewrite constitutions. They just kept showing up. Rodriguez and his delegation attended every event not as organizers, but as participants. When asked for advice, they gave it freely. When asked why they were doing this, they shrugged and answered with that typical human phrase. Because it's fun. It was so absurdly simple that it made 6ix9ine want to scream. But it was working everywhere. Reports came in daily. Kiki, now practically living at the Intergalactic Games Planning Center, flooded 6ix9ine's office with updates. On Vrosa 7, rival tribes had abandoned centuries of infighting after uniting to build the first quasar curling stadium. The Jovians, who hadn't spoken directly to the Seldari in over 5 centuries, jointly published a cookbook. Even the Chronowaris were seen hosting time loop karaoke nights, allowing participants to redo failed verses until perfect harmonization was achieved. 6ix9ine paced his office floor, muttering to himself. This isn't diplomacy. This is culture, Kiki offered softly from the doorway. And somehow, that was exactly what it was. The humans hadn't won the galaxy. They hadn't conquered it. They had shared their culture, one of chaos, creativity, joy, and occasional deep-fried absurdity, and the galaxy had adopted it wholesale. What 6ix9ine had once called destabilization was beginning to feel more like liberation. Species who had been locked into rigid traditions were suddenly alive with possibility. No one feared stepping out of line anymore. Mistakes became part of the fun. Disputes didn't lead to war. They led to dance-offs, bake-offs, or ridiculous engineering challenges. Councils no longer feared the chaos. They welcomed it. Rodriguez, as always, seemed utterly relaxed about the situation. 6ix9ine cornered him again at the 3rd annual games, this time beside a plasma-fueled grill where the captain was casually flipping what appeared to be a glowing purple steak. "Captain," 6ix9ine whispered harshly, "you're changing them." Rodriguez looked at him, confused. Changing who? Everyone, 6ix9ine hissed. The entire galaxy is starting to act like you. Rodriguez grinned. You say that like it's a bad thing. And 6ix9ine realized, for the first time, that maybe it wasn't. Because for all the chaos, the unpredictability, the strangeness of it all, it was working. There were fewer skirmishes, more cooperation, more joy. The galaxy, which had teetered for millennia on the knife's edge of annihilation, was laughing again. It was alive again. That night, standing quietly at the edge of the festival grounds as hundreds of species danced under the light of a binary star, 6ix9ine finally allowed himself to admit it. The humans hadn't saved the galaxy through superior firepower or technological supremacy. They'd saved it by making sure no one wanted to fight anymore. Because somehow, the prospect of ruining the next Galactic Bake-Off, or missing out on the annual 0G Hot Wings Challenge, or forfeiting the upcoming black hole surfing relay was simply unthinkable. Wars hadn't been outlawed. They just stopped making sense. And in that moment, watching Kiki enthusiastically explain the concept of ES Mors to a delegation of crystalline diplomats, 6ix9ine knew. The galaxy wasn't under human rule. It was dancing to the beat of a human drum. And maybe, just maybe, that wasn't such a bad thing after all.